and then he was in the Royal Engineers in the Second World War in bomb disposal. You know, so I had a sort of army thing going on because that's the song he'd sing when he was shaving. Roses are blooming in Tipperary. So I'd hear him in the morning. So it's those things that are more important. But I read the books. There's some very, you know, most battles were chaos, obviously. You know, some of them countless thousands killed in the first 5 minutes, and it's just unbelievable reading. But the line officers always did their notes after battles, and they attempted to write reports. You know, there was a kind of almost heartbreaking effort. The logistical nature of the war was tremendous because I think there were 1 million horses or something. So I think all that hay that had come up every day, they never used the bloody horses to the end and all the rest of it. You know, so I did want to know those things, and specifically the line officers' reports, even though they were so boring your head would knock back and sleep after a few pages. But it was very useful there because when I got to the battles, and I would have read them maybe a year before, I had some idea. I was very interested in the gas attack, obviously, because the Irish had been there, and I thought that was quite forgotten. Then, you know, there was a second gas attack, and even though they were prepared for it with masks, in Easter week itself, and again 600 Dublin Fusiliers were killed in the trenches that day. I think it was the Tuesday of Easter week. So the mourning around Dublin at that time was, you know, all the wives and sisters and mothers and grandmothers and aunts and fathers, of course, of the back streets who owned these people who'd been killed. So that was the news of the time, of that day and the subsequent days. So it was all incredibly complicated. And you can understand why, you know, we needed to have a slightly narrow nationalistic history to create the country that we wanted. But there were so many babies thrown out with that bathwater. And the odd thing about that is so many of these stories, they were our stories. You know, if you took away that segment about the soldiers in the war, if you took it out of the story of Ireland, you were actually robbing people of information about their own beloved uncles or fathers or great-grandfathers. So I wanted to read about as much of that as I could. I didn't find the verbal accounts so useful. I was a bit afraid of them because that's a voice you don't want to get into your head, and there's some fabulous ones. You know, you can hear them in the Imperial War Museum. You know, a lot of British soldiers, and you know, we were all scared. You know, some of this little guy was saying, "Oh, scared, yeah, we were all terrified. You piss your pants and everything." Like, you wouldn't want to show your fear because you don't, you know, wouldn't want to spook your mate beside you, you know, when you're going up the ladders. And all these things, you know. You'd think, well, I don't need to write a book, it's here, all in 2 sentences with this wonderful voice. Yeah, so there's the only book, one of the very few books I have read for. I mean, when you're writing a book, you tend to squirrel around things and try and gather things to yourself. Birds of things, you know, running through the long grass in your library and trying to get some stuff for yourself. But, yeah.
Willie and Tom Dunn, these are figures you've invented, or invented individuals. I happen to have a pure chance cousins called Willie and Tom Dunn. Oh my goodness.
You can claim them if you like. I'll give them to you. But actually, my great-grandfather's name was, when I wrote the Stuart Christendom play about him in 1990, when it was on 1995, I didn't even know his first name, because he was so seemingly disgraced in history, because he was one of the 3 officers who led the charge against Larkin in Sackville Street. So you can just stop right there. That's enough to get you written out of history. He wasn't even a name in the history books. My own father didn't know his name, so I called him Thomas. But subsequently, after the play was on, I found out his name was James Patrick. And much to my astonishment, because Willie, who first turned up in that play, as a little boy singing the Ave Maria, and the only reason he was doing that was I had sung that at Fesh myself, and I'm scarred for life by messing up. And so I gave, you know, you give your characters these things. Again, research. And what sort of research? Divine research and so on. And but you know, I was very touched by the generosity of the things I touched on, even though I had the books. But they were real people in a sense. But Willie is not a real name. He had 3 sons of the war. I was saying that's what astonished me. One of them was a chaplain. One of them was the Catholic chaplain in Dublin Castle, if you can imagine such a thing. And only recently I found out about him that on the night that James Connolly found that he was going to be killed the next day, this man, my great uncle, who would have been, was sent down to get Mrs. Connolly to come up, because he was held prisoner in Dublin Castle, and to talk to him before he had to go through that ordeal. So, even though these are, even when you make them up, even when you give them names, you think you're making them up, actually you're not really making them up, because something else knows more about it than you do. Thank God, because it was left to me that nothing good would happen. Away from that. I read it years ago, 20, 30 years ago.
Because it's such vivid poetry.
Yeah.
That imagery.
And the German, especially Sassoon here as well. But we sort of grew up in that a little bit. And memoirs of an infantry officer. And All Quiet on the Western Front, which in German is invested in Nixon memoirs, which is slightly different meaning. They're sort of Bibles, really. The reason people read those books is because they were great books. You have to try and make it the best book you can for something like this, and fail in the doing it if necessary, because it is such a responsibility in its own crazy way. But I mean, I had those things in me, there were even Irish novels. Liam O'Flaherty wrote one, and Patrick McGill. I read one of his, I remember, before I began to see what was going on there, so that was very useful. But there was sort of the fighting Irish thing going on with that, and the drinking, and this wasn't the thing I wanted particularly to write about. But I wasn't the first. And Jennifer Johnson, of course, in the 80s, inimitably perfect book she wrote about the First World War. So it wasn't the first. It's by no means the first novel. I was launching a book called Annie Dunn, a little novel called Annie Dunn, and my editor was there, John Ryan. Faber, we were in Dublin, and he said, as if not, it's just as if he's talking, he wasn't even looking at me, but he was sitting beside me. And he said, it's been over a long time, since there was a book about the Irish soldiers in the First World War. They're paying a lot of money to have a book like that. And I just do this to his face. All right. But I didn't realize that he had the Stuart written on his desk and speeches from it taped up all over his desk for the last 10 years. So there was a rhyme and reason. But actually, I am very suggestible, so be careful what you say to me over the radio.
Because your novel would be perfect for children dealing with war poetry and everything in school. I used to teach it.
Yeah. So I'm proud to say that it is an optional book here. It's also in a module at A-levels in England. I was the proudest man in Christendom when the Secret Scriptures just put on a syllabus, which is kind of wild. And I know the children of England will never forgive me now. Hi.
In relation to that book, did you eat and sleep and live?
I did. Because how else can you do it? I mean, first of all, I was surprised because I was afraid of it, obviously. Going to the war wasn't an appealing prospect. But the curious thing was that when I had the men, and it took me about a year just to get those men together. One of them was my builder, and one of them was the electrician in the house when I was building it, and all that. But when I had them there, they were so welcoming then, that it made it more possible, but also much more intimate. Because it was as if you were in the back of the trench with them. And they were saying, oh, you're all right now, because you're 90 years from now, you're not going to get killed. But we'll show you what's going on here. And there was something very companionable about it. So much so that when I was bringing my kids to school, and when they were at junior school in Tinnahealy, the graveyard beside the school, as I said, had the Pasley brothers in it. And I remember that November when I was finishing the book, in your raincoat, feeling very strange, like I was back from the war. And of course I wasn't, because I was entirely and utterly safe. I hadn't gone through anything except writing a book, which in its own way has its perils, but not like the First World War. And just having that feeling of having been there, you know, really strange. And I think it's partly because, you know, maybe there's been too much emphasis put on the silence around this because, you know, after the war there was a victory parade in Dublin. Ireland was a victor of the First World War, you know, internationally, status-wise, because she made such an incredible contribution to it. And, you know, everyone has known people who were in the First World War, and some of the shell-shocked people in institutions. There were often people who, you know, were really done in by the war. And soldiers themselves don't like to talk about the war. But even so, considering that it wasn't a very suitable subject, let's say, for nationalism, I suppose, even though it was part of nationalism, that's the tragedy of it. That 90 years, whatever it is, doesn't seem like proper time. So that when you start to write about it, it's as if that little thing called 90 years disappears. And you're actually back there with them. And they're still ready to talk. I remember even at the Booker dinner, 2005, when it was on the shortlist of Booker, just before the announcement, I just closed my eyes. It was partly because they gave us pheasant to eat. I wasn't feeling very well. So I closed my eyes, rocking with the pheasant and the whole pressure of the thing. And I sort of saw them there. And there was like Christy Moore and O'Hara like this, you know. We want to give that eat or that thing. And then, of course, the next thing, John Mandle's name is, you know, and I can see him sort of turning away. No, it was that intimate, you know. So I mean, I think they're in us all, because there's 200,000 people at the war, 50,000 killed, and all dead now, every last one. So there's nobody in Ireland, in this tiny country, who hasn't got them flowing in their DNA